Hello, I'm Jake Boudrot, Civic Journalist at Hello Community Television. With me today is the Warden of Richmond. Welcome, Lois Landry.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
So the intent today is to start a conversation around issues affecting the municipality, the County of Richmond, as well as the people, organizations, and businesses in Richmond County. And hopefully from there we'll get some viewer feedback and we'll see where it goes from there. So one of the first things was that we were talking about was the community engagement sessions that were held around the multi-purpose facility that's intended to, at some point in time, replace Richmond Arena. I know that was discussed at one of the recent council meetings, and maybe you can update on how those engagement sessions went and where you guys are going from here with that.
Sure. So a little background. Back more than a year ago, last council kind of said, look, wouldn't hurt for us to have some conversations about what a multi-use facility could look like in Richmond County. And so there's a lot to unpack in that kind of conversation, in that the vision of that, or even the possibility of that. So, do we build something or don't we? And if we build something, what would be in it and where would it be? So there's lots of questions around that. So the first thing they did was they hired a consultant company. And, I think engagement can be just our elected officials speaking to our residents. That's doesn't cost us anything. But this group of consultants actually were responsible for the design of the project in Guysborough, and they've been involved in a lot of the new. Like the one in Dartmouth, I think, in Halifax. So there's a lot of expertise that goes into that, and we need that expertise in terms of cost per square foot and, making sure that whatever we decide, we've decided it with some really good information. So one of the first things they did was they just sort of did conversations with folks around, what are your thoughts, and if we even broached the subject, what would you be interested in? And they tried to not only kind of do surveys and that typical thing, but they also had like pop-ups where they actually stood up at the co-op in Ayrshire, and they went to a place in Lardoise where they went to where the people were to just make sure folks had this conversation. They had over 400 people, I think, that were part of those consultations, and they came up with a What We Heard document, which you can find on the county's recreation site on the website. And so that really identified a couple things that community were really interested in. Make sure that it's central. Make sure that you're not competing with other things. So, complement but don't compete. So those conversations led to them going back and giving a tentative set of diagrams and floor plans and architectural, but very much a starting point for the next phase of engagement. So basically they're saying, okay, here's what we heard the first time we spoke to people. So this is, one incarnation of that. What do you think of this? So they held 3 engagement sessions to kind of get a sense of like, were we on the right track? Were we totally wrong? So that they can finish their piece of this. So the consultation is not finished, but their part ends with this. So they had 3 locations, 3 events. So one was at Scratch Eats here in Ayrshire around lunchtime. So again, people could come to that, but they were also hoping there would be people there anyway who they could lure into this discussion. Because, we have seen open houses that have had not a lot of people go. So they tried to put them in places where people would already be. So then they had a session, and there were about, I think, 40 people who went to that one. There was, they actually found out that there was a Civic versus Richmond Academy hockey game at the arena in Lewsdale. So they held it at the arena in Lewsdale. They started at 7 and went to 9. So there were 40 people that went to that, and there were some people who wouldn't have gone except they were already at the hockey game and they popped up to see some of the stuff there. And then there was one at the Farmers Pantry in St. Peter's on a Friday morning around 9:45, which was great because there were also people there. And I went to all 3, and that one in particular, people would walk in and didn't realize there was a consultation session going on, but they stayed to hear what there was. Some of the venues, that one in particular was a little small, so there were some people who kind of didn't come in because there was not a lot of places left to sit. But I'm not as concerned about that because it is not the end of our consultation about this. So when you look at what people had to say, I think there was a general consensus about a handful of things. One is that Central is exactly right. So, you know, I know it might be disappointing to some, but Ayrshad is not Central. And, you know, Evanston is not Central. And Lardois is not Central. So I think there was a consensus that it would need to kind of be in some kind of central location. Some people think of Central as geography. You know, what's the geographic center? Some people think about it in terms of population. But that is one thing we did seem to have consensus on. There was also kind of a general understanding that in addition to Central, water and sewer has to be considered too. Like you need to put this somewhere where either there are services or it's so close to services that it wouldn't cost a fortune to build out, right? This is not something that could be where you don't have water and sewer. So a couple of those things kind of came out. I will say that there's no question, what is this going to cost was a huge question on many people's minds. And that started out with like, do we even need to have a multi-use? We have an arena, why are we even having this conversation? But I would encourage folks, if you haven't already, to take a look at the study that was done in 2019 on our Richmond Arena. It's on the website. If you go to the Richmond County website, over on the left is council. You'll see a place where it says plans and reports. You can scroll down to the bottom. It's 2019 Arena report. So that report laid out all the structural concerns. That building is like 50 years old, right? So you're talking about ice that's on a pad that was poured 50 years ago. You're talking about building codes have changed time and time again over the lifespan of that. We have a Freon system, I think it's called. They don't even make those anymore. So in 2019 dollars, it would cost $3.5 million to bring that building to the point where it could stay opened. And anybody who's built a patio will tell you that nothing costs the same today as it did in 2019. So plus our building hasn't gotten any better since 2019. So, you know, estimates I've heard from people in construction industry is that you really have to double plus that. So you're looking at anywhere from $7 to $9 million for Richmond County to invest to keep the arena opened at some point.
And that's just repair the existing structure that's there.
And so you'd have $9 million, you dish out $7 million, $3.5, whatever the dollar is, a lot of money to still have a 50-year-old arena, right? And so when we had those conversations, I think there was like a pause, like, okay, well, we can't have nothing. And you know, make no mistake, if we don't have an arena, let's say, it means there aren't enough empty slots in the Civic Center's calendar of ice time for us to transfer all of our slots. Like, you know, you'd be talking about no high school hockey in Richmond County, which we have had high school hockey here since we've had high schools. So, and there are kids who wouldn't play minor hockey. There are other, you know, folks who gentlemen's hockey, using the term gentleman loosely, but gentlemen's hockey would be, you know, would be really dicey to try and fit in another arenas. We just don't have, they don't have that capacity. So, and a big part of our identity and how we get people to feel like living here is worth doing is around making sure we've got these kinds of facilities. So I will say, there was, I feel like a shift in a little bit of the conversation there, like, well, yeah, we can't have nothing. Like, I think we got that. And if I, you know, this is my speculation in terms of how this all went, but I felt like the two things that people were okay with us really, really consistently, almost by consensus, is the arena, part of a new facility, and a walking track. Like that was a walking track around the arena seemed to get a lot of support. And really, in terms of how much it costs to upkeep that, it's not a great amount. So I think people were really good with that. So then the rest of the conversation is really, well, would we have anything else, and if so, what? So the consultants talked about a gym. And I can tell you that I have a particular feeling about that as somebody who was the principal of a school that had the largest gym. There are no, the high school is constantly saying no to people in terms of gym space.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too. It's hard to get space, not just at Richmond Academy, but at Cobo Port and anywhere else just to be able
And
to have a practice or
That's
anything.
right. And we don't have things in the community like mini basketball, where you would see that. And I think there's an appetite to have that. You see it in other communities. It's a cheap way for your kids to get involved in something athletic. It's not as weather dependent, but there is no way for that to happen Monday to Friday because existing gym times just aren't there. So gym space was one of the things the consultants talked about. They also talked about a performance space. So, a space that could be, and I think they talked about dividers, so it could be a small space for a more intimate performance use, or it could open up to be bigger than that. So what was interesting about those parts, like what should be in it, aside from the arena and the walking track, it was all over the board. We don't want any of those two things on one hand, and on the other hand, we want all that and a pool and like batting cages. And so people were really engaged in that conversation. So just for folks who follow along with the council meetings at the Committee of the Whole coming up on Tuesday of next week, so February 11th, the consultants are going to speak to council at Committee of the Whole. They're going to do a presentation where they will speak about kind of the end of their work. So they presented what they, wanted to throw out there to engage, start conversations, and then they're going to tell us what they heard. Because it was in addition to, I went to all 3 sessions, but there was also an online survey.
Yeah.
So we'll hear from them, and then one thing I think we did hear about is, we've seen up in Victoria, currently in Victoria County, there's no ice space. Like there's, and that was a community I think that put some money into an old rink only for that to close down anyway, right?
In Bedeque,
So
in Bedeque,
yeah,
yes,
in
yeah.
Bedeque. So I think one thing residents were okay with, even those who were concerned about, what does this do to our tax fair question. But I think they were okay with us, like, at least being at the ready should the arena collapse, or, not for nothing, but we are looking at industry coming to Richmond County, and if that increases our revenue, how do we feel about some of that going? Obviously, we would be like looking at all the funding sources. Federal funding sources, provincial funding sources, and even some of the other kinds of soft money that's out there. So, if you're in Fort Mac, Suncor's got its name on everything. So, to our companies who are looking at our wind, talk's cheap, but we need a Zamboni. Those kinds of conversations. And as much as the Bruins fan in me finds this difficult to say out loud, could we speak to the Habs and say to the Montreal Canadiens, look, Richmond County's NHL, history is embedded in the Mike McPhee, and is there a way to get some money? And I'm only going to be okay with that if they have like a Brad Marchand penalty box or something like that for the Bruin fans. But those kinds of soft money that we could leverage. So I think people were okay. My sense is people were okay with us having these conversations. What it's all going to cost is another conversation that we're absolutely going to have. But I think we saw the Bedeque example of putting money towards a building to try and keep it afloat, spending that money, and then it's gone because that building is now gone anyway, and not wanting to see years between an arena closure and a new potential arena, right? So I think we at least know we have some consensus, I think, on that.
Yeah, and when you're talking about soft money, I know that Anadarko did give a considerable amount of money to the Civic Center, and
Yep.
it's arguable that the Civic Center might not have been able to develop and be maintained without that money. I believe it was for a 10-year period.
Yeah.
I could be wrong there too. So, that might require it. But I guess what it's going to come down to is the size and cost, and
Yep.
that's really what we're looking at as far as that issue goes.
It is. I do want to sort of say, though, that when we talk about cost, it's not just the cost to build it. We do need to be mindful of the cost to operate a building too. So one of the conversations that has come up around pool is it doesn't cost that much more to build a pool than it costs to build a performance space, let's say. The cost of building those two things are not terribly different. The cost of operating a pool is quite a bit higher. It is the highest operating cost of any. That's one of the things the consultants talked about. the operating costs, so what it costs to keep that building open day after day after day, those are among the highest costs in any kind of facility you could put in a multi-use building. So we need to be, and I was a lifeguard, and I can tell you, you don't just sort of apply to be a lifeguard and be one. It took me years to become one. And so we don't have a lot of lifeguards in Richmond County at this point. So what would it mean if we had a pool and we couldn't staff it, plus the cost of actually physically keeping that building open? So it's cost to build, but also operational costs.
Yeah, and I know from covering Port Town Council that the Strait area pool is a major strain on their budget. It costs them a lot of money to keep it going, so it's a consideration for sure.
It is, yeah. And so on the one hand, we have a pool that is not it's not being used to its fullest capacity. So I remember we used to have multiple swims on Saturday, public swims, and there aren't quite as many. And so, you've got a pool that is a drain on their resources. But on the other hand, if you want to get your child in swimming lessons after school on a Monday, good luck. If you call and you're not the first person on the line, by the time you get through, you're not getting through. So it is that kind of dichotomy of it's running in the red, it's not being used to capacity, but the times where it is used, there's a wait list for that use. So it is, like, we've had people who are just, a couple people just, there needs to be a pool, really passionate about that. So the consultants have kind of given us they're going to give us kind of a starting point for any additional conversations we need to have.
Now, another topic, many residents have received their property assessments from Property Valuation Services Corporation. And I know there is still some confusion. Some people are under the false impression that it comes from the municipality and that you guys do the property assessments. And I know that even covering past councils and council terms, there's been some confusion. And I know there's explanations been required to say this is PVSC that does this and administers this. And maybe if you want to.
Yeah, and so, I can certainly understand why people are upset with the municipality when on tax day you write a check, municipality of the County of Richmond, you have more to write out and you send it to the municipality. The amount you pay for your property tax is the tax rate times your assessment. So the tax rate is what's set by the municipality. The amount you multiply that is your assessed value of your home. And that assessment is done totally separate from the municipality. We have no jurisdiction over that. PVSC is a company that is run by the province. It's its own corporation and it's separate from us. Interestingly, one of the first things that I did after I was sworn in was I went to a new councillor orientation in Halifax. Bit of a misnomer because the information there was, several people, Amanda Mumbercat was there as well, but several people go even if they're not new councillors. So a lot of really good information. They had a round robin kind of thing where you got 10 or 15 minutes and at each of a series of tables. And so you could just ask questions of a bunch of these organizations. And one of them was PVSC. And I can tell you, they got an earful every 15 minutes for 2 hours from other municipalities, saying, listen, our residents. So, each person at those tables was representing their residents' concerns, saying, our property values have escalated and therefore property taxes have escalated. Now, one thing I think it's worth sort of saying is that there have been, and you don't have to take my word for this, you can Google property tax rates Nova Scotia, and there's an Excel sheet type thing you can sort, and you can sort by year and sort by community and whatever, but we have among the lowest tax rates in the province. We're not the lowest. I don't know what they're doing in West Hants, but whatever it is, the good news story there. But there
Guysborough
are,
too is another
yeah,
one that
but
was low.
West Hants is way low. I don't
is,
know why that
yes.
is, but there are really only 6 municipalities that are lower than Richmond's tax rate. One of those, though, I think it's East Hants. They have a lower residential rate, but they have a higher commercial rate. So it's kind of a little bit of a draw with that one. So really only 5 that are lower than us, Guysborough being one of them. And so I will say that for the last 2 years, Richmond County, acknowledging that property values, so that, property rate times property value, this one went up. So they held this one. So instead of increasing, which a lot of other places do, for the last 2 years, the property rate here has not gone up, really because people understand that, to change both of those things would really be problematic. So one of my concerns with property values that have come up, and this is something I would actually hope that residents would not my place to tell people what to do, but I hope residents will consider this. When you get your paper in the mail, it says if you'd like to appeal, you can. And I know people are appealing, and I would encourage everyone to do that. One of the things that I think you want to consider is the audience. So you're going to write your letter about why this should not be, it shouldn't have gone up. Wouldn't hurt to keep in mind the person who's going to open that letter is paying a much higher tax rate than you. So I've heard of some people that are going to appeal because they say, we're paying too much tax and we can't afford in Nova Scotia to pay this. Your property value is multiplied by 0.85. The person opening that envelope and reading it is probably like 1.3, like $1.30 per hundred. So that's one thing you can certainly say, but I think what we really want to help capture, we want to convey to property valuation, is that I get that after COVID, the price of a home here went up. It went up dramatically. And property values are essentially what somebody would pay for your house. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but it's true. Our houses that might have been worth $45,000 went up to $150,000. Our houses that might have been worth $200,000 were selling for $400,000. There was a point where our houses were selling for a ridiculous amount of money. And I actually had put my house on the market back in 2021 or 2, I think. When I went to a realtor and I said, just list it for whatever you think. And if I asked that same person, I want to sell it today, he would definitely list it for $200,000 less, right? Because our property values have come down in terms of how much people are getting for their homes and how much longer they stay on the market if they're trying to sell them. So one of the things that I would encourage people to do if they're going to appeal, and everybody who's concerned should 100% appeal. I think you have until the 15th of February. It's on your sheet there. But if you know of a house, and there are houses in this situation right near us in this studio, so you can go to viewpoint.ca. and you can use the map and zoom into your house. You can see houses all around you. If you click on details, you can see what a house sold for and how long it stayed on the market and what the asking price started out at. So we have people who put their homes on the market at, say, $400,000, and then it stayed there for 150 days, and then they put it down to $350,000. It stayed there for another 6 months, and then it went down. So you can see where there are homes around you that the property values have dropped dramatically. What somebody is prepared to pay has dropped. So I am not 100% clear why our property values went up at all.
Would that help in an appeal if someone was
I don't
going to
think
appeal?
it can hurt, right? Because it is helping. It is based on what the properties around you have been worth and what their resale value. That is one of the indicators. So I would encourage people to actually make the argument, your house is not actually worth what it says on this paper. It might have been last year, truly, but those things have come down. The other thing I would encourage people to include in their appeals is, like, if you're on a private road, you have to plow your own driveway, which is not just your driveway, it's the road. So if that is something that, people are assuming that you're getting a certain amount of service, in Richmond County, if you are on a private road, you're responsible for plowing and all the services with that private road. Put that, because if I was a single mother and I saw a house on a private road that I had to plow the road, or that exact same house over here on a main drag, I'd buy it here, but I wouldn't buy it here because I'm not somebody who could have plowed my own road. So any of those things where you can say, my house in particular is not worth this. I think that that's something people should include. The other thing that I don't know if people appreciate is the number of buildings that don't pay property tax in Richmond County. So our churches, but a lot of our community groups. And so if you're a community group and you get this piece of mail that says, we've assessed your property value at this amount, who cares? Really, what difference does it make? If you're not paying property tax, what difference does it make? But one of the differences it makes is that if we all aren't considering our property values and we all aren't appealing our property values, then you're like a lone voice in the wilderness, and these big properties are perhaps being over-assessed and nobody's appealing them because there's no repercussions, there's no consequence.
They get written off.
Yeah,
The
they're
taxes
written
are
off anyway.
Yes.
So yeah, I would be paying $10,000. Who cares? I'm not paying it. So if you are involved in a not-for-profit that is tax exempt, or your taxes are being exempt in whatever capacity, it wouldn't hurt for those folks to actually appeal those as well. And one final thing I would say, when our property assessments were low, and our taxes therefore were low, if you had a building that you weren't using, whatever, wasn't costing any big amount of money. If you have a building on your property that you are not using, that is in disrepair, that is unlivable, you're paying some pretty high tax on it now. So there were some people who didn't bother knocking down buildings because it's a lot of money actually to knock down a building and get that debris taken away. But the folks across the road from me had a mini home there. And nobody was living in it for several years, and it had become unlivable. But they got to the point where they actually did the math, and I think it's cheaper to hire somebody to knock it down, take it away, remediate the site, than it is over the course of several years to pay property tax on that. And as soon as they knocked it down, they let property valuation know. I was there, property valuation came within a few days to verify that that was not there. And their property taxes, of course, are quite a bit lower. So if you have, and that's all linked to our unsightly premises, but if you have buildings that are really derelict or just not something you use, you're actually paying, your assessment is based on a building, not what kind of condition it's in. So any of those things that you can do to help bring the property valuation, and if we all kind of think of that collectively, the more people who appeal, the more I think weight goes into that appealing process.
Now, one subject that came up during the municipal election and predates that was the availability or lack of affordable housing in Richmond County. And I know that was an issue that you and I had discussed previously.
Yeah, it is something we are sinking our teeth into. So just a couple of updates about how we're working on that, what we're thinking about that. So I know, as somebody who had children in front of us in our classrooms, in our schools for 30 years, when we had hungry children, when we had poverty in front of us, I could have gone to any of 20 people, 20 organizations, 20 individual business people, and I could have said, listen, this family is up against it. Like, this kid needs eyeglasses. This mother's phone bill is, their power is going to get kicked off. We could find ways. Listen, this kid's hungry. I could get donations up the wazoo for food for that kid. We have always been a community that looked after our people. But housing is something that is more than goodwill from individual people can address. So our housing situation is significant, and there is quite a bit of research that has been done around what our housing deficits are in this county and what they are going to be. So let's suppose we just build at the same rate, what they're going to be in 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And that doesn't include a lick of growth. So when we look at growth in our community, which we are already seeing. So Claire Rankin came to council after the election, municipal election, and said it was the first time we have had an increase in voters on the voters list. I was principal at the end of my career. One of the last years of my career was principal at Felix Marchand Education Center. In 2019, there were 50 children at FMEC. There are 96 there now. So we're seeing communities where people have decided to move home, where people from away have come. So we have that pressure on, but we are looking at industry which is talking to us about short-term in terms of a year-long construction growth, but then also longer-term employment. So what we know is how many houses we're short now and what that looks like moving forward. So it is a significant issue. So to that end, what we are doing at council, and it's a particular passion of mine for sure, but we started out by meeting myself, the CAO, the Director of Operations, and we met with our lawyer and the director from Eastern District Planning and said, here's the MGA, and here are our zoning bylaws, and here's all the things. What are all the things that we can do to support development? What are all the levers that we can pull to make it so that developers can do what they do best, which is build? And then where there are things we can do, how expensive is that? And how do we figure out if we've got the money? And if so, let's start figuring out how to do that. Where there are challenges in the MGA, so there are certain things we're not allowed to do, certain incentives to housing we're not allowed to do. Let's get in front of the Minister of Housing and say, listen, if you change this in the MGA, we could do more. Because what we know about this government is I think every single legislative sitting, the Minister of Municipal Affairs has opened the MGA and made changes. So there is absolutely a willingness to make amendments to the MGA. So I'm not interested in hearing, well, we can't, because if we can't, we need to make sure that we get that changed. And I think there is a path forward there. So then following that, we've actually started, we're doing it this week, last week, and next week. So we're meeting with our big developers and our folks who are looking to get into that space. So we've got several developers who have built, 15, 20, 25, 30 units. And we're asking them to talk to us about, what brings you to this space? Where are the good news points? Like what can we kind of sell about ourselves, and where are the challenges? And some of the challenges that they're talking, like I don't think we've heard once that the CMHC is like a disaster. It was never meant to support rural communities, and it's worse than a disaster. It's worse than not helpful, because there are developers who have gotten kind of stuck in the rabbit hole, and maybe they could help me, maybe they could help me, and you get like a year has gone by and you realize they were never going to help you, but you've wasted a year. So we're meeting with those big developers. We're also meeting with some people who are looking to get into that space. So people who are looking at single family dwellings, who have land and are saying, look, I would build. And no question, some of the issues are, the math has to math. Like there has to be it has to be, like, we can't expect business people to be charitable organizations, right? They have to be able to make a little bit of money. And for some people, it's about, look, so long as I can, have a small margin, I'm interested in the equity. What's this worth after 30 years when everything's paid for? So we're hearing about a lot of provincial things around rent supplements, federal things around, right now, if you want to build a home to sell it, you have to put HST on it. I mean, you're already paying HST on every part. We know that one of the federal parties has said they would take the GST off new home builds under $1 million. We need to sort of see if other parties will start to see that expanded. And if we can get a commitment from the provincial government that if the GST, and you see this quite often, if GST comes off, the provincial part of the HST also comes off. But we need a commitment for that. So we're really committed to kind of getting that done, and we'll present those findings to our first PAC meeting on March 4th, and then see where that takes us. So it is something that we have never not been interested in this, but the situation is really pretty dire at this point. Mm-hmm. So it's a big part of my priority, and I think council is very much interested in seeing where that takes us.
I suppose a lot of it depends on serviced areas too. It'd be hard to encourage development in an area where there's not already water and sewer there.
Interesting. There's no water and sewer in Dundee, right? And you're seeing a huge kind of development there. Mm-hmm. So what we're also looking for is making sure that we are working with developers when they talk to us about advancements in water and sewer. So there is a way that you can establish a much larger water and sewer. You can ask us to take a levy as if it was your water and sewer payment. We would hold on to those funds, give it back to you so that you service your own water and sewer. So we have people from Alberta who have moved to the area who are talking to us about things that they have done for water and sewer that are really advances in technology around water and sewer. So we are we are looking at this from all levels of housing and all support that goes into infrastructure support, and where are the dollars to apply for extensions of our current water and sewer, and what can we do to support developers and do that, and where do we incentivize that, and where do we, and there are restrictions. The UARB says you can't charge this, and there's all those kinds of things, but we need to make sure that on the development side that we're getting out of their way and we're supporting them as much as we can. On the other end of it, there is recently the Chamber of Commerce has decided to spearhead an initiative to get a not-for-profit housing association up and running, and that is coming along. So they've just hired, they advertised for a consultant to move that over the course of 6 months from idea to we're ready to go. And so there's some really good people involved in that, and there is a lot of appetite to make the not-for-profit sector work. And what I've heard consistently from builders is that there is so much of a deficit in our housing stock. We need all of it. There's no competition. If builder A builds something, it's not like builder B can't fill his units. The number of people who are short units is really significant. And if we're looking at growth in the community, and the growth that we're looking at when we talk about wind, there is no boom or bust to wind. There's boom or bust to oil because oil runs out. That seam of oil or that seam of coal will be exhausted, and then you have to go to another one. Wind is not a boom or bust kind of thing. So there's less concern about building housing and contributing to the housing stock, and then seeing that sort of, gosh, now we've got all these empty houses. We're a long way from that being a concern. So there is an appetite to see the not-for-profit sector, and there are real benefits to not-for-profit.
Yeah, they can leverage funding.
They can leverage funding. They only need certain down payments and that kind of thing. And so that's great. We want to be supportive of that. And the Chamber's not-for-profit would be focused on Richmond and the town of Port Hawkesbury. But what we know is that it's developers who get it done first, right? They get it done fastest. They're the most efficient. One of the things that's been really interesting about, there are real challenges to building in Richmond from an economic point of view. So if you're a builder, the lumber it would cost you to build a unit in Discoos, Arishat, Loosedale, Thirdways, whatever, the lumber is the same price as if you were building something in Halifax, but you can charge $3,000 for rent in Halifax. You cannot charge that here. The folks living here don't have the jobs and the means to support that and to rent those $3,000 units. So there's some real mathematics pressures there. So there's a disadvantage to being a builder in Richmond. On the other hand, it's been striking to me how many of our developers are their own builders. So people who are developers are putting up their own money, but they're also hammering their own nails and building their own buildings. And so what that does is, and even when you don't have that, you have this really trusting partnerships between builders and developers. So you've got developers who know who will build for them, and they have a workforce that they're really confident about. And then the builders know that they've got a developer who's going to pay them. So we have an advantage here because we all know each other, right? So those partnerships are something that we have going for us here that you wouldn't see outside of a small rural community. And I would argue we're really a powerhouse in housing. Like when you look at our, Pettigaw, Loosedale, even Arishat and Discoos, right? My old elementary school is now 10 apartments. And St. Peter's and the town of Port Hawkesbury, so you've got Breela building there, but also taking over West Richmond School. Mm-hmm. We really are, per capita, I would argue we are hugely impactful in terms of our ability to build. Also collecting some information about the percentage of public housing units we have based on compare that to the percentage of our population, and I don't think we're getting our fair share there. So we'll be actually pursuing that
on a per capita basis,
per
100 people.
Yeah.
Now, another thing that we talked about recently was you had a meeting with the Seniors Take Action Coalition.
I did.
Maybe you can talk about some of the things that were discussed at that meeting.
Yeah, so I've gone to a couple of them. I think it's the second one I've gone to. This one was a meet the warden kind of person, and the conversation you and I just had now about housing had with them as well. And and the Seniors Take Action coalition is made up of an executive, but there's also representatives from each of the communities and their seniors groups. So you're talking about a lot of knowledge sitting around that table. So lots of information about, to contribute to those discussions. They're also, so it was a kind of a meet the warden kind of thing. But they're also really advocating for several things that are maybe in some cases senior specific. So for example, they're advocating for reduced, like I wear hearing aids. So they're talking about hearing aids for seniors, but like super expensive and really cost prohibitive for a number of seniors. So they're really working on some senior specific issues, but they're also working on some things that I think are impactful for every group and every organization, because I think you're talking about a real powerhouse of volunteerism, of understanding how organizations work. So they have been really lobbying to see changes in our grants policy. So currently you have to pay for every single thing, show us that everything is paid for, and then assuming we've granted you some money, you have to give that money. We would only give you the money after you've proven to us you've paid for everything. So they have lobbied really quite hard to say that is a challenge for our organization, but really it's a challenge for many organizations, and even more so for some other. The other thing they've really spoken to us is firming up some of the ways our grants policy, what we ask of our already busy volunteers. So they're saying, like, look, could we, if there's a community group that doesn't, in one of our smaller communities that doesn't have, it would be a lot to ask of them to register through Joint Stocks and to do all the paperwork that Joint Stocks requires, which is, as currently our grant policy requires that you show us that you're registered. And they said, that's a lot to ask of our already pressed volunteers. Is there something that we could do, Senior Take Action Group? Could they sponsor a group to request those funds from the municipality through our grant structure that would make it so that the small groups can do their work and get the $500 that it would take to get something off the ground without making them go through that? Could they be a sponsoring organization? So they are a really great group, because a lot of what they are arguing for and lobbying for is really impactful for all organizations, in addition to the programming that they're doing, right? So they've got seniors groups and virtual cafes and lots and lots on the go, really creative group. So lots of great discussion there.
And of course, the population of the municipality does tend to skew more towards seniors, so there's a sizable chunk of the demographic here that is 65 or around that age plus.
Yeah, and we are, I think I've seen that we are the oldest demographic. So we are the county with the oldest demographic, that we have the largest percentage of older residents. What I will say is that I would like for that not to be the case. I think that that's the reality of where we are. But I think we've seen, I'm pretty sure I saw the last Stats Canada report for the first time in a long time. The average age of Nova Scotian has actually come down. It's the first time that's happened in a really long time. Yes. So we're looking, and my Felix Marchand example, with the increase in the population of children there. So I think we're hoping to see some movement, and it goes back to housing, right? I had this conversation with one of the developers. If you open up a housing unit, you aren't just going to get people who are currently, couch surfing or, living in precarious housing. You might actually get somebody who is living in a perfectly lovely home, but they have outgrown that home, and they've outgrown the demands of, my godmother had a lovely home, but when her husband died, she just didn't want the burden of home ownership. She didn't want to have to mow the lawn or hire somebody to mow, hire somebody to plow. She just didn't want that anymore. And she had been a lifetime resident of Richmond County, and ended up having to move to Antigonish because there was nowhere here for her to go. But, so if we open up something in Arishat and St. Peter's, you are probably in some of those situations going to open up a home for a doctor, for a nurse, for a skilled trade person to come here. So a lot of it is about sort of the big picture of housing.
I spoke with the people at the mill, and they expressed some concern, but in the with the lack of certainty as to what's going on, it's kind of hard to
Lack of certainty. It's crackers. Like, we were on Sunday, we were talking about, tariffs, and then, you got a president coming out and saying we're going to be the 51st state, but I'm not sure he wants us to be 51st. Like, we may have dropped down to 53rd because now he's taken over Greenland and the Gaza Strip. Like, we're using terms like Gaza, Mar-a-Lago, Riviera. It's just, there is a lot of uncertainty. What I will say is that the municipality has this at top of mind. It is top of mind in our discussions at this point and going into the next fiscal year. And we are very lucky that one of our councillors, Amanda Mumbercat from District 4, sits on the executive of the Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. And they have nothing, like this is a top priority for them. So you won't just see, we've seen Andy Fillmore from Halifax issue a statement about, we're really considering it. I think you're going to see a more comprehensive municipal approach through our Federation of Municipalities. So I can assure people that while this is a stressful time, it is something that this municipality and all municipalities are actively pursuing best path forward.
Yeah, and even though Port Hawkesbury Paper Mill is located in Point Upper, which is in Richmond County,
Yep.
You guys do have a joint industrial committee with the town of Port Hawkesbury, and although, as I said, it's not in the town of Port Hawkesbury, the future of the mill really does impact the Port Hawkesbury as well as it does Richmond. I mean,
Yeah, it does, and I mean, it's the big, like, can Port Hawkesbury Paper, if they were, if somebody was in the States buying Port Hawkesbury Paper at $100 a unit, it's going to cost them $125 to buy it with a tariff. So if somebody in Alabama is making paper and it cost $115, well, let's just buy it now because this, so that changes the dynamic, and it's a huge thing. But make no mistake, it is not just the big folks like Port Hawkesbury Paper. We were at bingo once. I work at the bingo in Discoos, and at one point this summer, there were lots of complaints. Why is there writing all over my bingo card? And it was actually, when we looked, it's an outline of the map of Texas, because the bingo cards at the bingo in Discoos come from Texas. So if in retaliation, we're putting tariffs on American goods coming into Canada, if Ronnie at the bingo in Discoos was paying $100 for a box of bingo cards, it's now going to cost him $125 for that same box of bingo cards. So what happens to the jackpots, and do bingos become less viable? Like, it's not just the big paper mill stuff, even though that's but I think it's the far-reaching tentacles of all of this. I will say that it has certainly been nice to see that sense of patriotism, and I don't think there's any question that we need to diversify where we do business so that we're not as reliant on any one country, because this has certainly been a wake-up call for that.
Yes, it certainly has, and it looks as though it's a situation that's going to be fluid, I guess, over the next little while. Let's hope there's some kind of resolution or some kind of sanity there. But I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I know you're a busy person, and coming down here to talk about this. And I know that when we spoke about this, one of the things we wanted to do was to get some public input and to have the public be part of this. So as I said, it was the beginning of a conversation, and it doesn't have to necessarily be in this format. It can be in other formats, something a little perhaps more free-flowing, or doesn't even have to involve me. So I guess what we do is put out a call for people. If you have some input, some suggestions about how we should do this program, please call here at Tellil, 902-226-1928, or you can email me at jake@tellil.tv, and we'll try to incorporate your suggestions, your questions, your feedback, whatever. We want to open this up to the public and make them feel engaged in part of this process.
Yeah, I think that, what we're seeing is, look, I think we need to be really expansive in the way we communicate with our residents. And so, as the weather is just unpredictable. So as we get into some better weather months, you'll see I'll start doing community halls and that kind of thing. Happy in District 2 and on the island, happy to do that elsewhere if somebody wants to do that. I'm going to the Bonnie Brae Seniors Club later this month. So happy to get out in front of people. I think we know that social media has been something we've relied upon, but it can't be the only thing we do, and we really need to get out in more engagement than just, a paragraph. And we also know that Facebook is changing not for the better, and I find it hard to even participate in it because it seems like it's nothing but ads. And so I could post something, it doesn't mean anybody's ever going to see it. So I really do want to get out in front of people and in a two-way conversation, and making sure that people feel like they have access to the warden and that there's conversation that is two-way. So if you have questions, if you have a beef, if you have something, happy to do that and have that conversation. I know that there are people who are a conduit for others. So you've got some person and somebody will say, hey, I wonder what, and this person asks. And so those people, happy to sit with them and in this kind of format. So really call Jake and call me or email, happy to sort of see which ways we can get out in front of people and have those conversations in this way that encourages us to get out into the community more.